Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I've got a bone-chilling story for you. It's Halloween, so what better way to set the mood than with a tale about a man, a car, and a ride he'll never forget. This is The Last Ride. Make sure you're somewhere safe, and let's get into it. It was Halloween night, and John was driving home from a long day of work. The sky was pitch black, and the only thing lighting his way was the faint glow of his headlights. It was the kind of night where the air felt thick with tension, the wind howling through the trees like distant whispers. John wasn't a big fan of Halloween. It wasn't that he disliked it. It just seemed childish to him, a holiday for tricks, treats, and pranks. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way the fog had rolled in unexpectedly, or the way the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, even though he'd driven this way 100 times before. His phone buzzed in the passenger seat, but he didn't bother checking it. Not tonight. He was only a few miles from home, and all he wanted was to be there, safe, warm, and away from the strange feeling creeping up his spine. That's when he saw it. Up ahead, just beyond the reach of his headlights, there was someone standing by the side of the road. A hitchhiker. John squinted, trying to make out more details. The figure was barely moving, just standing there as if waiting. Now, picking up hitchhikers wasn't something John normally did, but there was something almost compelling about this one. Maybe it was the way they seemed out of place in the middle of nowhere. Against his better judgment, John slowed down and rolled to a stop. "Need a ride?" he called out, his voice betraying a hint of unease. The hitchhiker stepped forward, and as they did, John noticed something unsettling. Their clothes were old, really old, like they were from another time. The figure's face was still hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but there was something wrong about the way they moved, like their limbs were too stiff. The hitchhiker nodded and, without a word, opened the passenger door. As they climbed in, John felt the temperature inside the car plummet. The silence was suffocating. John's hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as he glanced at his new passenger. They hadn't said a word since getting in. They just stared straight ahead, motionless, like a statue. "So, where are you headed?" John finally asked, trying to break the tension. The hitchhikers slowly turned their head, but instead of answering, they raised a hand and pointed ahead, toward the dark road that seemed to stretch on forever. John swallowed, a knot forming in his stomach. He tried to focus on driving, but something felt off. The radio, which had been playing quietly before, was now filled with nothing but static. And the air, it felt thick, almost suffocating, like the weight of the hitchhiker's presence was pressing down on him. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The road ahead was swallowed by the dense fog, and the headlights barely cut through the swirling mist. The hitchhiker hadn't spoken a word, but John could feel their gaze burning into the side of his face, even though their eyes were hidden in shadow. That's when the first sound broke the silence, a soft, almost imperceptible hum. It was coming from the back seat. John's heart skipped a beat. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. No one. Just darkness. But the humming didn't stop. It only grew louder, like it was coming from inside the car. At this point, John was on edge. He could feel the tension building, the atmosphere growing heavier with each passing second. His breathing became shallow, and the temperature in the car dropped even further, his breath now visible in the cold air. Then, the hitchhiker finally spoke. "Do you know what night it is?" Their voice was low, gravelly, like the sound of earth being shoveled onto a coffin. John hesitated before answering, his voice barely a whisper. "Halloween." The hitchhiker let out a slow, raspy breath, almost like a chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "The night when the veil is thinnest," they muttered, almost to themselves. "What do you mean?" John asked, his voice shaky. Without turning, the hitchhiker's voice dropped to a whisper, so quiet John had to strain to hear. "The night when the dead can cross over, when they can return." John's blood ran cold. He tried to laugh it off, tell himself it was just some Halloween prank, but something about the hitchhiker's tone made it impossible to dismiss. Suddenly, the car shuddered violently, the engine sputtering. The dashboard lights flickered, and the radio went silent. John's heart pounded in his chest as the car slowed to a crawl, then came to a complete stop in the middle of the fog-covered road. No, John whispered, his eyes darting to the hitchhiker, who still hadn't moved. This can't be happening. The hitchhiker slowly turned to face him. You can't run from them, John. John's stomach dropped. How did they know his name? He hadn't told them anything. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. But before he could act, he saw something in the fog. At first, it was just a shadow, vague, barely noticeable. But as the seconds ticked by, it became clearer, more distinct. And then there were more. Dozens of shadowy figures moving toward the car. They were human, but not. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like they were being controlled by strings. Their faces were pale, eyes empty, and their mouths twisted in grotesque smiles. John realized too late, these weren't people. They were spirits, the dead, returning on Halloween night, just like the hitchhiker had said. John turned to the hitchhiker, panic rising in his chest. What do they want? He screamed, his voice cracking. The hitchhiker's smile widened, revealing rows of sharp, decayed teeth. They want you, John. You're one of them now. Before John could react, the figures outside the car shattered the windows, their cold, skeletal hands reaching for him. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the fog as the dead dragged him into the darkness.